David Barton, could you please explain the founders' meaning of separation of church and state? This is a good question, and it comes up every time.
Separation of church and state is a phrase that had a...
Oh, wait, hold on.
We're not on? There we go.
There we go.
There we go. Separation of church and state is a phrase that had a really well-established historical meaning at the time the founders used it. It was not just a concocted phrase. It stayed established for 150 years after they used it, but very simply, it was that the Bible had created an institutional separation of church and state. You had Aaron over the spiritual stuff in the temple. You had Moses over the civil stuff. When King Uzziah tried to combine them, God whacked the king, and now I want the two institutions separate. But it got combined at about the 4th century A.D. And what happened was the government took over the church, and the government said, we'll determine theology, and you guys enforce what we tell you to do. It wasn't the church taking over the government. So what happened was we went about 12 centuries that way. We call it the Dark Ages. That's where all the atrocities occurred in the name of religion, particularly the Christian religion. And you get to a point in time where you have dissenters popping up. About 30 folks over 7 nations, 250 years, said, no, we got to go back to what the scriptures say. And that's the first guys to start pushing for separation of church and state. It really came to a head when Henry VIII in England wanted a divorce. The church said, no, not doctrine, you can't get divorced. He said, I'll start my own church and determine my own doctrines. At that point, Reverend Richard Hooker said, no, it's got to be separation of church and state. You're the government, you don't determine church doctrine. So at that point, you had from England, 1580s, starting to come to America, people who had that view, that belief. The government is always trying to take over the church, not vice versa. So for the 150 years in America, separation of church and state meant the government can't stop us from doing a religious activity, determining our own theology, expressing ourselves, our faith the way we want. And that's the way the founders did in the First Amendment. Government cannot do anything to establish a federal religion, and government cannot do anything to stop religious exercises, period. When Jefferson wrote the famous letter, January the 1st, 1802, it was in response to a group of Baptists in Danbury, Connecticut, saying, we're the minority religion up here. We're afraid the government's going to stop us from expressing our faith. He said it won't happen. There's a wall of separation between church and state. So for 150 years after Jefferson's letter, separation meant the government could not stop a public religious activity. It changed in 1947, a judicial decision called Everson versus Board of Education. The court said, you know, we think Jefferson screwed it up. Separation, he said, meant the government couldn't stop it. We think that it should mean that the church can't get involved in public stuff. And so at that point in time, we're now at the point where Congress shall make no law now means that a kid can't say the word God at a graduation, which is a stupid parsing of the Constitution and First Amendment. But that's the history of separation of church and state.